Let us chant Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahatu Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahatu Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahatu Samma Sambuddhassa. All right. So, we are going to be doing a new sutra today. So let me just share the screen. Nadi Sutra. Right, on the Nadi Sutra. So the Nadi Sutra is with regards to self, and it affirms and reaffirms how the grasping of anything with regard to self brings about suffering, right? Brings about suffering. And it works with a beautiful parable that we are going to go into, right? Okay. So, the discourse on the river. Let me just change the setting so it's clearer. The discourse on the river. Is this big enough, everyone? Yeah? At Savatthi, there the Buddha said this. The parable of the riverside plants. The parable of the riverside plants. Bhikkhus, it is just as a river coming down from the mountains in the distance, flowing swiftly. On both its banks, if Khan's grass were growing there, Khan's grass, I think in people use it for decor in the UK. It's Khan's grass. It's kind of like these ones, Khan's grass. Yeah, Khan's grass. So, Kusa, if Khan's grass were growing there, they would overhang from there, from the banks of the river. If Kusa grass, have you seen Kusa grass? Yeah? Maybe there are people who haven't seen Kusa grass, so let's do that as well. Kusa grass. This is Kusa grass. No? This?
Bhante, we can't see.
We can't see any pictures, Bhante.
Oh my.
We can only see your letters saying Kusha grass and Khan's grass, no pictures.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I had to share it properly. Okay.
But we have
You
heard
already looking at
Kusa Tanamiti we have heard.
So this is Khan's grass. Can you see the Khan's grass now?
Yeah, Pampas. That's a Pampas.
Yes, Pampas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these, actually not the Pampas, the ones which are a little bit, they're quite much like the Pampas, but I mean quite much like the Pampas. These ones. Yeah.
Where's the arrow, Bhante?
Can you see it now? No?
Where is the arrow, Bhante? We can't see the arrow. Which one are you showing?
Oh, this one.
Yes, they are used for the
Pampa. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Yes.
yeah.
In
So
England,
Kusa,
also you get this. Yeah.
yeah. Kusa grass.
Yeah, I have seen it here in London.
Yeah. So
You
these
get
are
it in, yeah.
the Kusa grass. I mean
Ah,
the Kusa grass.
yeah.
Yeah. So all these sort of leaves which overhang from the banks of the river onto the riverside. Yeah. And
know-
yeah. And then bulrushers. Bulrushers, I think these are those ones that looks like the corn dogs. They are the bulrushers.
Ah.
Well,
They do look like the corn dogs, don't they? The bulrushers. Again, sort of plants which are near their aqua plants, isn't it? Right. And birana grass. Now, birana grass is birana grass. Not sure what that is. Let's say birana grass. Well, doesn't have much. So maybe another type or some sort of low-hanging sort of grass type. Well, it doesn't say anything. But growing there, and they would overhang from there. If trees were growing there, they would overhang from there. Now a person being carried off by those currents, if he were to grasp the Khan's grass, they would break off, so that he would thereby come to disaster and destruction. If he were to grasp the Kusa grass, they would break off, and that so that he would thereby come into destruction. All this person who's been taken by the current of the river, trying to save himself, so tries to hang on to these grasses which sort of falls from the banks of the rivers onto the trees, but the current is strong, he is heavy, and the grass cannot save him. So the grass breaks off, and then he is taken away to his disaster and destruction. If he were to grasp the reeds, they would break off, so that he would thereby come to disaster and destruction. If he were to grasp the binara grass, they would break off, so that he would thereby come to disaster and destruction. If he were to grasp the tree, they would break off, so that he would thereby come to disaster and destruction. Disaster and destruction. The untutored, ignorant person. Even so, bhikkhus, an untutored, ordinary person who has no regard. So, an untutored person who is untutored means who has no sort of seasoning of Dhamma, who has no Dhamma practice. Untutored, ordinary person, prutukjana, right? And worldly person who has no regard for noble ones, and is unskilled and undisciplined in the teaching of the noble ones, who has no regard for the true individuals, and is unskilled and undisciplined in the teaching of true individuals, regards form as self, the self as possessing form, form as in the self as in form, the self as in form. Rupang attato samunupassati, rupavantang va attanang attani va rupang rupasming va attanang. Again, sort of going into how a person sort of, the Panchupadana Skandha, right? Who has no regards form as the self as possessing form, form as in the self as in form. And when that self of his breaks up like the kosa grass, he thereby comes to disaster and destruction. Right? He thereby comes into disaster and destruction. He regards feeling as a self, the self as possessing feeling, feeling as in the self as in feeling. And so this is talking about an instance where the being, the individual who is the untutored worldly person, worldly ordinary person, right, regards rupa Vedana as self. He sees himself or the self as possessing the form as in the self. He completely, without any sort of reservation, he completely attaches himself to the Rupa to himself. In every aspect and possibility of the word attachment, he clings. He links himself and to the Rupa and the Rupa to him. Right? But just as a person who is being taken by the current and tries to sort of hold on to the Kusatana and the Pampas and all of that, just as none of this sort of is strong enough to remain upon after the breaking up what happens. He, having put all of his or asserted his self in these, in form, in feeling, he takes it himself into destruction. Right? Destruction. Because why? He has not trained himself to be anything without form, without these feelings. He regards feeling as self, the self as possessing feeling, feeling as in the self as in feeling. And when that self of his breaks up, he thereby comes to disaster and destruction. He regards perception as a self, the self as possessing perception, perception as in the self as in perception, the self as in perception. Sanya, clinging on to sanya in the same manner, linking self into what is perceived. And when that self of his breaks up, he thereby comes to disaster and destruction. He regards formations as the self, Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara as a self, the self as possessing formations, formations as in the self as in formations. And when that self of his breaks up, he thereby comes to disaster and destruction. He regards consciousness as self, the self as possessing consciousness, consciousness as in the self, and the self as in consciousness. And when that self of his breaks up, and it will, everyone, it will, as we all know so well, we come into destruction, we come to destruction and disaster. Right? Destruction and disaster. So we are talking about an instance where a person untrained and now මෙතන තියෙනවා වැදගත් කොටසක් which we went over earlier, this part, he is not simply just untrained, he has no regard for noble ones, and he's unskilled and undisciplined. Now what kind of person is this? He has really lived under a rock. Right? He has really lived within a plane of existence so exuberant in the applications of self, craving, tanha, just going through the winds of the world, right? Just simply going through the winds of the world, having no sort of sense as to what the reality of the world is. We are talking about that kind of a person, right? Now, we must then sort of look at, now we know we are ordinary persons, we are mundane Prutujjana individuals. Do we fall into the same category? Right? We surely do not. I mean, if we do, we are actually wasting our time. Right? We do not fall into the same category. However, we could fall into a category which is a little bit more heinous at times, which is that Banchaka Dharmas. masquerading our own self, or rather fooling ourselves. This person is not fooled. This person is not fooled in the sense of he is not trying to cover. He simply does not know. He simply has not attributed or sort of looked at the world through the Dhammas. He has no idea regarding the Dhammas. It is such kind of a person. What we could possibly do knowing the Dhamma is to fool ourselves. That is what we could do, to fool ourselves, right? To fool ourselves into thinking that something or something is a phenomena, is good, pleasant, welcome, all of these things, when it actually isn't. Clinging on to rupa in such a manner, clinging on to feelings in such a manner, right? Clinging on to perceptions in such a manner, right? Even, for example, the perceptions rooted in the Dhamma. Right? That is what happens when people so sort of, piously devoted towards Buddhism, but is not seasoned in the true practice of Buddhism. So what happens? People then sort of, if someone needs to say something against the Buddha or Buddhism or the practice, what happens? That person now starts sort of agitating oneself with all of these things that arise, isn't it? Right? Attachment, that is not what a seasoned practitioner would then experience, isn't it? Right? That is sanya, the attachment. Now see, yes, we are not completely ignorant as the person this sutra is talking about. However, we can fool ourselves, right? So we are not completely free of this as well, right? And as we travel along samsara with the same rupa vedana sanya sankhara vinyana, unenlightened, and of course hanabali, prone to harm, prone to sort of all of the sort of the vicissitudes of life, what can happen is we draw dependent upon certain practices that is not entirely the practice of nirvana. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ වගේ දේවල්. What kind? The Buddha has taught us about, for example, he has taught us about āmisadāna and pratipatti, right? And pratipatti, about āmisa and pratipatti, right? Āmisa, a foothold to go into pratipatti. But we simply keep on holding on to amisa. That is also then just like that person sort of being taken away from the current of the river, holding on to that, because why? That too is impermanent, isn't it? That kusala itself is impermanent, right? It will at one point give fruit, but that fruit will also waste away with time, right? And waste away with time, and we are in the same position. So, Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vinyanayata, towards the five aggregates, this untutored ordinary person clings, right? Clings without any reservation, completely links himself to the Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara and Vinyana. Now, what happens? When the breaking up of self happens, he thereby comes to disaster and destruction. Thereby comes to disaster and destruction. Now, the aggregate characteristics formula. Let us see what this is. Now, what do you think, bhikkhus? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. In what is impermanent unsatisfactory, painful, or satisfactory, pleasurable? Unsatisfactory, Bhante. Is what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this I am, this is myself. Not at all, Bhante. Now what do you think, bhikkhus? Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. Is what is impermanent unsatisfactory or satisfactory? Unsatisfactory, Bhante. is what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself? Not at all, Bhante. Now, what do you think, bhikkhus? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. Is what is impermanent unsatisfactory or satisfactory? Unsatisfactory, Bhante. Is what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this I am, this is myself? Not at all, Bhante. Not at all. Now, what do you think, bhikkhus? Are formations permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. Is what is impermanent unsatisfactory or satisfactory? Unsatisfactory, Bhante. Is what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this I am, this is myself? Not at all, Bhante. Now, what do you think, bhikkhus? Is consciousness permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. Is what is impermanent unsatisfactory or satisfactory? Unsatisfactory, Bhante. Is what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this I am, this is myself? Not at all, Bhante. Right? What can we take from this? The five aggregates, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, which is the crux of or the foundation pillars of our existence, has at its core impermanence. Impermanence. Its natures are impermanent, suffering, and non-self. The illusion that we have that we can control these according to how and what we want it to do is classed by the Buddha as a hallucination. Right? Hallucination. We are simply fooling ourselves. What we create is the prolongation of suffering. අද අපි දුක් විඳින්නේ නැහැ. ඒත් හෙට අද හරි සැප විඳලා හෙට අපි දුක් විඳමු කියන අදහස හිතේ තියාගෙන අපි ජීවිතයක් නිර්මාණය කරනවා. ඔතකොට මට අද දුක් විඳින්න හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒත් මං හෙට දුක් විඳින්නම් අද පොඩ්ඩක් මේ සැපේ විඳලා. Right? That is what we essentially day in and day out, that is although we wouldn't voice it or word it in such a manner, such a gross manner, that is what we are doing. Right? If it is hot, we on the fan. If it is hot, we on the fan. If we are not looking nice, we go and change our clothes. Whatever it is, we try to change the circumstances and situations. But let us go a little bit more deeper. Let us go a little bit more deeper. Rupa in itself is impermanent, suffering, and non-self. Form is impermanent. It is unsatisfactory. It is not fit to be deemed as this is mine, this I am, this is myself. How can this be mine when upon death, upon the breaking up of the body, you have another body? Right? You have another body again and again and again and again and again. You know, this is as if, to put it in a very crude manner, a prostitute thinks every person the prostitute sleeps with, that man is hers. What a fool. Right? That is exactly what we are doing. We think in this very temporary world, within this very temporary span of life, this body that we have for this very insignificant moment or period of time within samsara, in comparison to samsara, it is not even an organism, because samsara is that big. Samsara is that big. We cling on to this thinking that this is the be-all and the end-all of me, myself, and I. Who is the fool? We are. We are the fools. Mercy, according to Mercy, there is a more Gani monk. We are the fools, right? Of clinging. Perceptions, how we perceive the world. How we perceive the world, the perceptions that arise with regards to persons who are categorically pleasant or unpleasant to us, right? Or situations that are pleasant or unpleasant to us. Those perceptions is rooted in by the same nature: impermanent, suffering, and non-self. The way that we categorically cling on to these perceptions itself is not fit to be regarded as this is mine, this I am, this is myself. Now, what does that mean? What is clinging to? I'm going to perceptions. When we say, it is impermanent, right? Perception is impermanent. It is unsatisfactory in nature, right? What is impermanent, unsatisfactory, subject to change, so anicca, dukkha, anatma, fit to be regarded thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. Meaning, whatever sanya or perception that arises, that perception we agree with, and without any form of reservation or any form of question, we attribute or align ourselves with that perception, right? යම් කිසි දෙයක් අපි හරි කියලා හිතනවා, ඒ හරි කියලා හිතපු ගමන් මේ හරි කියන ඒ අර්ථයට හරි කියන ඒ සංඥාවට අපි ඇලෙනවා, right? That itself, so it is not fit. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. What does that mean? That means that is talking about the inability of a person to maintain views that change. Meaning, if they change, if they are conditioned to change, if they are non-self, or there is no sense of self in it, then how can something remain the same? Something remains the same because we cling on to that as a particular thing and we hold it with our clinging. So the clinging is also an illusion, right? It is done by everything that is against the natural order, right? And the object that we have clung on to belongs at a period of time, belongs either our perception is altered or we are perceiving in a wrong manner, right? Or that what we have perceived, so what we might have perceived might be true at the time. That time has passed. However, still I'm holding on to the perception that this is so. But 10 years have passed. 15, 20, 30 years have passed. How can it be the same? Isn't it? That we hold on and cling on to. We see, so now what I am clinging on to and describing or aligning with myself 30, 20, 40 years after that clinging initially took place, that too is outdated. It is entirely not true. It is entirely not true. So when we take all of this, when we sort of hold all of this together, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, when we hold all of it together and put it and we look at it, right? We have deduced most of it in an ignorant fashion. We had deduced it to feel as if it is permanent, that it is satisfactory, and that there is self, that it is not subject to change by the power or the spirit of ignorance. So what? Self that has been formed on the basis of a lie, on the basis of foundation of a hallucination. That is how we too, when we live, although we might be pious, although we might have listened to Dhamma, but because we have not practiced, because Sati has not been established, Ayoniso Mansikara arises, this wrong sort of attention where I do not see reality for what reality truly is, which is the fact that all of these experiences are seasoned in the reality of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Exactly, everyone. Right? Let us move on. The non-self totality formula. Right? The first one was what? Okay. This earlier one was the aggregate characteristic formula. Right? Aggregate characteristics. So the characteristics of the aggregate. The non-self totality formula. What is that? Right? This is from the Anatta Lakkana Sutra, according. Yeah. Now, therefore, bhikkhus, any kind of form whatsoever, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, ajjata or bahira dhamma, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, right? Far or near, all forms should be seen as they really are with right wisdom, right? At the මොකක්ද ඒකට කියන්නේ? at the සතියෙන් දැකීම. How do you say?
ඇති සැටියට
ඇති
ඇත්ත
සැටිය.
ඇතියට දැන ගැනීම.
Okay, yeah, what she said, right? So that's a tongue twister. All forms should be seen as they really are with right wisdom. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. Now, obviously, as people who live, right, who do not speak to ourselves as a document does. Now, when we say we do not cognize things, thinking, this is mine, or this I am, or we do not do that. However, what we do is we see ourselves or see that experience as ours, right? And we do not do such a thing, right? We do not live or allow these winds of ignorance to take us for a fool and take us on a ride, if we might put it in such a fashion, right? To take us on a ride. We are stable, we are grounded, we are awake and alert, right? With sati, establish mindfulness, right? Establish mindfulness. And because sati is established, right, what does not arise? Restlessness, right? Uddacha. Because restlessness does not arise when we perceive, we are able to perceive with stability and groundedness in the Dhamma, so that we can perceive things as they are. When a person knows Dhamma but does not have sati, what happens is restlessness arises. When restlessness arises, the person knows Dhamma. However, the kileshas have not been suppressed. So restlessness arises. When restlessness arises, ayoniso manasikara arises sometimes. Yoniso manasikara arises, it depends on the circumstance and the situation. Sometimes it's right attention, sometimes it's not. And most of the time, when restlessness arises, it is usually wrong attention. So then we perceive, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Such a dialogue or such an inference happens, where then I take it as me, myself, and I, right? Therefore, bhikkhus, any kind of feeling whatsoever, whether past, future, or present, internal, external, gross, subtle, inferior, superior, far or near, this, let us just break that down here in the Vishuddhamagga. Internal is a physical sense organs, everyone, right? External is a physical sense objects, right? So in internal, physical sense organs is the chakku, sota, gana, jivha, kaya, right? The external is physical sense objects, right? So for chakku, it's rupa, isn't it? Rupa, saddha, gandha, rasa, oja. Rasa, sorry, not oja, pottappa, right? Feelings, right? Oja, pottappa, feelings, right? Now, gross, that which impinges physical internal and external senses with touch, right, which equals to earth, wind, fire, right? So the physical, the impingement, that is gross. The subtle, that which does not. So this is mano, mind objects, mano vinyana dhatu, right? Mind consciousness, and water. Because water, why is water here? Because water is felt through earth, wind, and fire. So there is a cognitive process which has to happen for us to perceive water. Do you understand, everyone? Is that clear? Yeah. Inferior equals unpleasant and unacceptable sense experiences, sense world existence. Superior, pleasant and acceptable sense experiences, right? Pleasant and acceptable sense experiences, form and formless existence, right? Now, everyone, something that we can also sort of think about just appeared to me right now. Now, when we look at sort of inferior and superior, because of the stories that we've heard about how wonderful it is to be born in the human realm, now why is this, right? Of course, the main reason why we would say such a thing with regards to the Dhamma is because of the ability to practice the paramis, isn't it? Because it is only humans who are able to practice towards the attainment of Buddhahood, right? However, when we look at the planes of existence, the human realm is the one where there is a sense of sanity and closest to the planes of insanity, meaning the woeful planes, isn't it? Right? Everything below us is absolute. I mean, there is no proper perception, there is altered perception, disruption of perception, pain and suffering, burning, everything that is suffering and dreadful is right below our legs, our feet, right? What does this say? What does this say? If we truly look at it, with the 31 planes of existence, the further we go above, and everything actually above us is great and pleasurable and all good and all of that, right? And why is it that within this plane is the only plane that we are able to work towards Buddhahood, or truly sort of finding out what the reality of this life is? Because of pain and suffering, everyone, right? So the attempt that we make to quench ourselves of pain and suffering could very easily also, while it might sort of seem noble, right, when we go into it a bit, it can also turn into a ayonso mansikara or even a vanchaka dhamma at certain places. Because the Dhamma does not teach us to sort of ignore half of the vicissitudes of life and then cling on to or try towards the other half, the pleasant half of the vicissitudes, isn't it? Right? There are 8 vicissitudes of life, right? And the Dhamma teaches us to, with radical acceptance, to come into terms with that unavoidable reality of life, right? Suffering, being in the place, in the plane that we are in the human realm, is an indivisible component, right? It is not a component that can be ignored. If we are human beings, we will go through immense amounts of suffering. However, that suffering, right, that suffering is what allows the humans to be or become Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas and Arahants, right? And that should not be ignored, right? That should not, because we sometimes then look at the human plane in a sense of, with a mystical sense, right? Because why? Why is because of the suffering in this plane. It is a direct opening to the reality of life, which is rooted in impermanent suffering and non-self. උඩට යන්න 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 ඒ ත්‍රිලක්ෂණය දකින්න අමාරු වෙනවා. යම් කාලවල වල ඒ ත්‍රිලක්ෂණය දකින්නම බෑ. Why? When the Kalyana Mitras, meaning people who are seasoned in the Dhamma, pass away, what happens is it becomes almost impossible to see Dhamma in that plane, because there is no one to point it out, because it is so pleasurable. Even amidst those pleasures, there are beings who sort of look at those pleasures with a sense of repulsiveness in order to practice their Dhamma. Right? So that should be noted, everyone. Superior and inferior. Far. Right? So superior is pleasant and acceptable. Right? Sense experience. Form and formless existence. Right? Far is subtle objects, difficult to penetrate. Near is gross objects, easy to penetrate. Right? Easy to penetrate. So this we can take the types of arammana. Ati mahantarammana, mahantarammana, paritarammana, ati paritarammana, kuddakarammana, ati kuddakarammana. From the great sort of weighty objects to the very weak, very, very weak and incomprehensible type of objects. Right? For example, if I'm looking out my window now, I see a fence, but what kind of wood is that, or I don't know, the design of the pattern or whatever. Those objects that are incomprehensible, right? Details. Whether or not near, easy to penetrate. Whether right. So that is the definitions offered by the Vishuddhimagga, right? So any kind of form, whether past, future, present, internal, external, gross, subtle, inferior, superior, far or near, all forms should be seen as they really are with right wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Therefore, bhikkhus, any kind of feeling whatsoever, whether past, future or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all feelings should be seen as they really are with right wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Therefore, bhikkhus, any kind of perception whatsoever, whether past, future or present, internal or external, subtle, gross or subtle, inferior, superior, far or near, all perception should be seen as they really are with right wisdom. Right? With right wisdom. When, again, with regard to perception, even when at this very moment in time as we go through this sutra, right, and there might be sort of things that are said or read that sort of resonate with you deeply and profoundly. Oh yes, of course, we all have sort of problems in our life, we all have sort of certain things that we are trying to work with, all of these things. And when we sort of say, okay, perceptions, now this is impermanent, this is suffering, this is non-self, and when we talk about hallucinations and attachment and clinging and all of these things, it can resonate with us. However, there is always an angle in our mind which says, oh no, but, right? Where the buts come in, right? And that sense of but arises from deep attachment rooted in self, right? Every time now we are reading the Dhamma, we are looking at forms, we are looking at perceptions, formations, consciousness, the crux of our being, and these buts arise in our minds. Right? With regard to but, of course, yes, this is, we find a way to cling, or we find a way to live in that delusion. That sense is then tanha ditti mana. You see, right? Tanhava drushtiya manya. Right? That makes sense, isn't it? Because we want to keep on clinging to this as we did, because that is far more comfortable, and we are far more sort of comfortable with what we know than the unknown, and enlightenment is a more unknown area for us. So we cling to the object as it was. Ditti, we take on different views, wrong views, to sort of attribute to why we must cling and why this is right and why we should sort of carry on with this. Mana keeps us sort of stuck in that pattern of thought. right? In that level and pattern of thought, tanha, ditti, mana, the way that we then attribute it and keep ourselves stuck. Now this, during Dana today, we thought about this example, which was, a piece of cling film, where it's wrapped. And if the cling film is sort of rolled up properly and nicely without any crumbled ends, it's a bit difficult to take out again, isn't it? So usually people crumble the last bit of it just to be able to sort of take it out properly, right? My OCD does not allow me to do that, so my cling film is properly primly tucked, right? So, which makes it far more difficult to sort of pull it out, of course, but it looks nice and I'm happy with it, right? Now, our meditation practice is like that cling film. Think about it. Because at one point we find, this is the end. My whole mind is empty, right? But then looking closer at it, letting go or vibrating to a more sort of subtle vibration, we realize, less gross than what we were, we realize, no, my mind is not empty. Right? Now that is like taking the role of cling film and then shining some light on it, right, against the light, and then realizing, this is the end of the cling film. And now we slowly, but now what happened? Just because we've seen the end, we can't be aggressive with the cling film. What happens if it does? We tear the cling film then, right? Then what do? We slowly try to realize what or which end I should work with, or how I should work with, the pressure I should work with, in order that I have a clean sort of piece out where I can now sort of work with it comfortably. Isn't that like our meditation? With everything that we sort of do, we first have to sort of recognize, come into that subtle level, recognize how I can work with it, and then work with it, right? Vibrating to a more subtle frequency to allow myself to let go of things that I thought I couldn't, or there was nothing to let go of, when there is there's so much that we can and probably should let go, because we are truly hanging on to something so fragile that can easily be lost in so many ways, right? I mean, who ever thought that we could die in a petrol line? You know what I mean? I'm sure those people who passed away, bless them, I'm sure those people who passed away never thought that they would pass away in a queue to fuel up. I mean, just imagine how difficult it would be for the monks to give the Pansakula. I mean, how are you even able to say this every year? Just imagine, how difficult of a situation, how pathetic that sounds. But that is the reality of life, that we are such fragile creatures, such fragile beings. Our egos makes us seem larger than life, so grand and great, right? But see, even for example with, I'm sorry to say, the bombings, right? And the people who were in vacation at Shangri-La, who died, some of them came from very wealthy families, very powerful families. Push, gone, right? That is the reality of life, and we never assume this, isn't it? Up until it truly happens to someone that we know. And even then, when that happened at Shangri-La, or when that happened to that man in the petrol queue, did we, yes, we thought about it, we were sad about it, but did we ever think, this could actually happen to me, right? This could actually happen to me, maybe for a little bit of time, but we get over it and we come back to our normal sort of self-attachment. That is the prapancha. Tanha drushtiya manya. Right? Tanha ditti manya. Right? Sort of exposing, the Dhamma truly exposing the big sort of, the foul of life. Right? Now, therefore, bhikkhus, any kind of consciousness whatsoever, whether past, future, or present, internal, external, gross or subtle, inferior, superior, far or near, all consciousness should be seen as they really are with right wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. Right? Revulsion. Now, seen thus, bhikkhus, the learned noble disciple is revulsed with form, revulsed with feeling, revulsed with perception, revulsed. Now, what is the meaning of revulse? We know what the meaning of revulse is. Let's just look at the definition. Oh. So apparently it's a technical death metal band from Australia. Right? Right. So revulsion, is this, but we must, here they have given the word disenchanted, right? 35, nibbida, right? Now that is a much more balanced word to work with than revulsion. I mean, revulsion is like so strong in the English language, isn't it? I mean, it's so strong that it could literally be taken as a dosa mula chitta rather than a kusala chitta, right? But we'll work with nibbida, disenchantment. Now that's a beautiful way to put it. Disenchantment. I don't know. Can you still see this revulsed here? It's, for some reason, it's okay.
Bhante, that's not a very good translation, because in all the ones that we say in Amarathi, we always say disenchanted.
Disenchantment. Yes.
First time I've ever heard of this word revulsion.
Revulsed.
In Untitled Sutta, which we chant,
Disenchantment.
it's disenchanted, Bhante, in English.
Yes. Disenchantment, right? Disenchantment. I mean, enchantment, right, gives you the way that we are sort of taken. We are so sort of taken about with this, and we grasp for it, we long for it, we are with it, we want it, we crave for it, we just want to exist in the profundity of this existence with this object, with this form, feeling, perception, consciousness, in love with this whole sort of painting of sorts, right? Which we sort of, just as a painting sort of remains, if we might put it in that manner. I think it wasn't it Shakespeare that said, that a painting sort of is stuck in time, that it does not change. Was it in Macbeth, right? Well, he says, a painting is stuck in time, it remains. The beauty of a painting, when painted, remains. That beauty never fades. Right? Now, in such a manner, with form, feeling, enchanted, and now you're disenchanted. You're not taken aback by all of that fool's glory. You're simply real. Not that now, now that you're pushing everything away, that you can't. No, it's not such. You're simply disenchanted. Right? You're simply disenchanted. You are not excited by the lusting for objects and the lusting of these external sort of forms, feelings, perceptions, formations, and consciousness. Right? Me mote ati there, e ati ආකාරයෙන් අපිට ඒ දේත් එක්ක ජීවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? Just a simple way that exists. We are okay. We not that we are okay. That would also be wrong to say that we are okay. We are able to accept that. Right? Even with sort of old age, even with sickness, right? Sickness, old age, and all of these things, sometimes we try to sort of, bring karma in, papa karma, karma, all of these things, to sort of paint or bring ourselves to a position where we can understand it. That is when what we are enchanted with has now been taken away. Right? Now, I think we get the point. Liberation. The Arahants review knowledge. Through revulsion or disenchantment, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated. When he is liberated, there arises knowledge. Free I am, he understands. Destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What needs to be done has been done. There is nothing more of this state of being. There is nothing more of this state of being. Now, something that we could sort of, in a way, take further from that, right? From that sutra, I believe is this. Is the ability now, self is built upon the illusion or the wrong illusion of attaching, clinging, seeing self in it, seeing that in self, and sort of truly sort of rooting our existence with Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana, right? In Vijnana. How a part of the practice, or a predominant part of the practice, is the fact of letting go. And how we often tend to sort of the focal point or the pivot of our life, if it remains within, meaning everything that we do circles around or is all about us in a very sort of egocentric fashion, right? Egocentric fashion, it feels very difficult for us to now be able to, because first of all, there is no such pivot. Earlier, we think that there is sort of this central point of ego. When that ego is no more, where does our life focus upon? It is a problem, isn't it? Because we live life, ages, decades, years, days, whatever, taking care of ourselves and everything that we sort of regard as me, myself, and I. So we live out taking care of our homes, cleaning our homes, doing the things that we love, taking care of our kids, parents, all of these things, right? Husbands, wives, cars, whatever, properties, whatever it is, doing the things that we simply just, that attribute, maybe we don't even love it, but we attribute these things to me, myself, and I. So I'm taking care of myself, or self, right? Myself, in that sense of the word, sort of a gap between my and self, right? Now that attributes to more sankharas that sort of then arise from this pivot point of self. Now, what if this pivot point of self does not exist? Where does my focal point then remain? Right? Where should my focal point come to? Then I believe that when the Buddha talks about, like we spoke earlier last week during the retreat, Dana, Sila, Bhavana, Dana brings a focal point to everything other than you. ආත්මාර්ථකාමී අදහසක් නොමැතිව පරාර්ථකාමී චේතනාවන් මුල් කරාගෙන කටයුතු කිරීම. Without any sort of egocentric volition, we have the welfare and the goodness of others in mind in our actions. Right? Dānya, nekkamme, right? The ability of shedding and letting go. Right? Even in the Paticcasamuppada, if we, is my screen? No. Even in the Paticcasamuppada, if we take the Paticcasamuppada from the cycle of, if we take the Paticcasamuppada for the cycle, this cycle here, remember this one, everyone? What is this called in English? Dil, you know the word for that.
Dependent origination.
Yeah, dependent origination. But this chart this has another name. The reverse not reverse dependent origination. There's another name for this, right? This part of it, right? This part of it. It'll come to me. So now avidya, paccaya, sankhara, and all of this, which we usually know. Then we have suffering here. Right, the suffering that we then use to sort of hop on to this. Now, this suffering, it is through this suffering, මෙන්න මේ සියල්ලගෙම යථාර්ථය අපිට තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ යථාර්ථය අපිට තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ මෙන්න මේ දුක පදනම් කරගෙන. We understand the reality and the dangers of all this cycle through the existence of suffering. Right? Through the existence of suffering. I don't know whether it will become bigger. Right? Through the existence of suffering. It's better now, ne? Right. Through the existence of suffering. From the cycle, transcendental, dependent origination, right? Where you transcend the 12 part of the dependent origination into nirvana, right? So, on or grounded in or through the realization of suffering and the letting go of this cycle that we are so clung on to through vipassana, we start sort of creating or being able to now develop this path which ascends on to Nibbana, the experience of Nibbana, right? The experience of Nibbana. This suffering, because of experiences or volitions, such as volitions or rather consciousnesses, resonating with Uddacha, Kukkucha, everything that defiles and destabilizes the mind, this suffering becomes something which is perceived, it can be perceived as something which is sukha as well. Because sometimes we cling on to suffering. Not sometimes, most of the time. We cling on to suffering. Right? We long. The excitement of being in suffering and longing for happiness is far more known to us than actually having happiness. Because when we have happiness, now we do everything to sabotage that happiness that arises. Trying to giving us reasons to say, oh, ease is all that life is about. Maybe I can have more. I am better than this. I can do better than this. The thing is, that is all Heenamanya, Seyamanya and Adimanya. You see, if that sort of cycle, if Heenamana, Seyamana and Adimana, that is Heenamana is thinking lowly or poorly, right, or beneath something, Seyamana is thinking that you're equal to something, a person or an instance, and then Adimana is thinking that you're higher, that you're too good for this, right? Basically, this person or this instance. If all three of those types of mana the Buddha has related to as a hallucination, like dead, like clean cut, the Buddha says, you're just hallucinating, right? You're simply just hallucinating, right? You're simply just hallucinating, right? When we come into terms, or when we understand that and we realize the mind trying to sort of instigate that we are below, these three types of mana, when that sort of goes away, we are able to see suffering. Now, what makes that mana go away? Letting go. Right? The ability to let go. Right? How do we, that ability of letting go comes through Dana, Sila, Bhavana, because this is high Vipassana. Dana, Sila, Bhavana. Right? So, and then coming into faith. Look at this. Faith. Faith in what? Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Right? Faith in the teaching. Why is the Buddha in this? Because it is only in the Buddha's teaching that this teaching is found. Right? Yes, there have been sort of traditions of meditation that existed, but no tradition in meditation taught about Vipassana. Right? Taught about Vipassana to such an extent where Nibbana is concerned. Right? To such an extent where Nibbana is concerned. This faith, now what is the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha? Something which is at that point, this practice, which is something which is within yourself but also external in a certain manner. Right? Faith in that belief in the practice, a loving contentment, rapture, calmness. No, let me reword myself. Something not ajattika, not bahira. It should be worded as this. Something beyond self, because self does not exist. ආත්මය පදනම් නොවිච්ච තැනක තමයි මේ ශ්‍රද්ධාව හටගන්නේ. ආත්මය පදනම් නොවිච්ච. There is no foundation of self. So then that Shraddha that arises completely Buddha Dhamma and Sangha, the practice without self, right? Without self. That is what allows through this sort of what we have realized through suffering, Shraddha arises, and through the Shraddha, contentment, rapture, calmness, bliss, leading to Samadhi. Right? මේ සමාධියෙන් තමයි අපි හරියටම අල්ලගන්නේ විදර්ශනා ඥාන මාර්ගය. Right? This is built upon this experience here. That all comes where? When we do not base our life experiences, our life happiness with the fragile ego, with the hallucination known as ego. Right? Known as ego. Ego does not exist. Meaning not exist, not in the sense we still have ego up until we attain avidya, but we come to realize that ego is this sort of hallucination that we are wrongly abiding ourselves to. We've not let go of it, but we come to realize that. Slowly but surely, with practice, that becomes more affirmative. That becomes more affirmative. Right? Even with the study of Abhidhamma, isn't it? We come to realize how ego works to a certain extent. Yes, we know, okay, this is wrong, right? This is a lie that I'm sort of clinging on to. But how do we do it? That everyone, that ability, mammeka komada karanne, how do I get rid of it? And even if you try to think about it very strongly, you can't. Isn't it? Just think about it. If you try to think about how do I get rid of this ego, how do I get rid of this ego here, you can't really put, you can't actually pinpoint it. Right? Why is that? Restlessness. Right? The restlessness, because your mind is not developed enough to then be able to see that subtlety where that ego exists. So then that is why Dana, Sila, Bhavana, again. Right? Where the ego is suppressed, the ego is sort of the power of the ego is reduced in a manner where now we can operate at a level where this sort of manifestation of the kileshas do not happen so aggressively where it hinders the vidarshana experience. Do you get what I mean? Right? The point that I want to come to is not simply just this. The point that I want to come to is then, what should our lives be about? I believe just as, the Dhamma, when it comes to Dana, Sila, Bhavana, when it comes, forget what we read in the Dhamma, and if we just look at simply what we do, our life is literally about everything that is around us, isn't it? Everything that we have, the physical stuff, as well as the people around us, the relationships, our friends, our families, where we come from, everything is literally about sustaining that, but the sustaining and the holding on to happens from an egocentric nature. What if our lives turned into position of beings, we turned into beings of service, beings where our life is about everything which did not work through a pivot point of ego, where our actions and the decisions that we make are not based on something. So for example, a mother taking care of a child. The child is someone who is external to you. That's another being, right? That's another being. The more the mother thinks, this is my child, this is my child, this is my child, the more agitated the mother becomes, right? The more agitated. I think some of you told me being a grandparent is far different from being a parent. As a grandparent, you enjoy the children more. Right? You enjoy the children more. right? Auntie Ungi said that to me actually.
She has only one son, Bhante.
She has only one son. Yes, Auntie Ungi told that to me. So, so so she was and then I repeated this, and you guys agreed actually, right? As grandparents yourself, right? Now see the ability. If now even as a monk, whilst our practice becomes sort of important, our lives are very much rooted in sort of supporting practice of the others, right? The Dalai Lama goes on to say that our lives are as valuable as what we do for other people. When the pivot point or the focal point of our life is against ego or is not based on ego, meaning the sustenance of Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara, that is ego, isn't it? Where is that ego created? Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vinyanaya Mamatvein Allah Gattama, the ego is created. When we cognize Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara through, again, self, the ego is created. This personality is created. But what if there is a paradigm shift in our existence, in the reasons that we live, where it shifts from supporting the propagation, supporting the further existence of ego, to now more selfless causes. Dana is a selfless cause. Self has no place in dana, right? Self has no place in dana. Nekkhamma there is no self in nekkhamma, right? Metta there is no sort of egocentric nature in metta, right? Mudita, karuna, there is no egocentric nature in mudita and karuna. It's all about give, right? Without having, I think those philosophies, those pieces of Dhamma teaches us a very important lesson about what or how or doing what brings happiness into our life, or the ability to truly live life to its fullest potential, which is to not have the same mundane focal points, being egocentric focal points in our life, but to turn our lives into a life of selflessness, where we are able to forgive, challenge ourselves to forgive, do things when we get nothing in return but the happiness of another person actually doing well. These are difficult things to do. These are truly difficult things to do. However much great people like Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa would be sort of, spoken of in the world, when we read about these people, we realize that they were not so sort of selfless, right? It is very difficult to do. However, the people like Buddhas, people like Arahants, Pacceka Buddhas, these people are able to do it. And what we can do is start small. Forgive those who are difficult to forgive. When your ego says no, you do not need to bend to that person. You do not need to bend to that person. Bend. When your ego says do not communicate, that person is not in your level. Communicate. Right? Doing things that are selfless, rooted in the Dhamma. The Buddha says something beautiful like this. The Buddha says, Manani, bhikkhus, begging is one of the most disgusting things in the world. It is not something which is sort of looked up to, right? However, bhikkhus, hingakama, right? However, bhikkhus, the lifestyle of the bhikkhus is rooted in begging, right? But this begging is different from all sorts of begging. This begging is for nibbana. The begging allows you to maintain a lifestyle where you can sort of live distanced from the sort of the sansara, the worldly pleasures. Right? The worldly pleasures. Therefore, bhikkhus, because of nirvana, this begging becomes noble. ඒ කියන්නේ නිවන් දැකීමට යම් කිසි මොකද්ද කියන වචනේ the requisites, the four requisites. What's the Sinhala word for the four requisites? Medicine, food, pass, සිව්පස. Right? සිව්පස හිඟා කාලා හරි සිව්පස ලබාගෙන ඒ සිව්පසෙන් නිවන කෙරෙහි කටයුතු කිරීම ඒ හිඟා කෑම බුදුරජාණන් වහන්සේ කියනවා ඒක ආර්ය හිඟා කෑමක්. ඒ හිඟා කෑමෙන් මිනිස්සෙක්ට හොඳක් වෙනවා මිසක් නරකක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ කවදාවත්. ඒ නිවන හේතුවෙන්ම ඒ හිඟා කෑම මේ ලෝකේ විශේෂත්වයකට පත් වෙනවා කියලා බුදුරජාණන් වහන්සේ කියනවා. Right? But this is not about, the ostentatious things that happens today. This is really about the siupasa. Right? This is really about the maintenance of life. To a love for a practitioner, to distance the practitioner from the worldly sort of ties and the bonds and all of that, to allow this practitioner to focus on what is important. Meditation, vipassana, right? That part. Yeah. So that is what I wanted to say, which is turning the focal points of our life and adopting selfless action, body, speech, and mind. Not being too worried about self, because we know even in meditation when we are so worried about maintaining, about everything that we can sort of I want to develop, it brings a sense of anxiety, isn't it? Am I going too far? Am I going too slow? I need to do this fast. I might die. All of these thoughts starts to appear, right? But when we let go of self, just like Ajahn Chah says, a true Buddha's disciple is not concerned with death, because the disciple knows Dhamma, practices what is right, and he knows that the next birth will be something which is good. Why? Because he is seasoned in that which is truly good. A good that is far beyond the mundane hold. Right? That is why a true disciple need not worry. Right? So if you're still, if death or, the uncertainty of the future worries you, then that is also a sign that we need to come into terms with reality. We have faced death more than we truly realize on our own. This life, this experience is as I mentioned, smaller than an organism in comparison to the samsara we have been living in for so long. I mean, long, the word long does not do justice to how long this samsaric journey has been. Right? And the truth is, regardless of what you let go, regardless of how austeric or difficult your practice would be, as long as you are rooted in the Dhamma, your next birth is going to be surely something which is good, because that is what your energy vibrates with. So you do not need to worry about death, right? Worry about letting go, worry about selflessness, worry about letting go of all the burdens that you and I have been carrying about since the beginning of our life. That should be our worry, not death. Death is an experience which might come, which will bring us to an end, but that experience is shorter than life itself. Right? And we are so worried, and and also we have so much of anxiety about that experience, because why? Letting go of Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana. Right? But at the end, what we have been clinging on to is, something in the lowest part of the 31 planes of existence. There is a world of pleasure that is far beyond all of these petty pleasures that we are so engulfed with. So engulfed with, isn't it? Right? So engulfed with. So that is something to think about. right? That is something to think about. Truly becoming our actions, truly vibrating with non-self, selflessness, not non-self, selflessness. Yeah. So that is the end of the sutra for today. Any questions?
Bhante, can I just say something?
Yeah.
Bhante, when you're talking about this selfless thing, so with your mind, you can't say, I want to let go of my ego, you can't do because there's ego with ego. So actually, for me, the way I correct me if I'm wrong, the way I see it, is this is all about the five aggregates and the five senses. Because of the five aggregates, you're always clinging to something outside your body. The five senses combined, if you had the five senses and aggregate. So that is what gives you a sense of I, because those senses in there. So and that is the human condition. So what you're trying to be is the divine, now you were saying, in the higher place, the divine condition. So the divine condition has the Brahma Vihara. That's why the metta, the karuna, the mudita, the upeka become so important, because those are the qualities which are divine. If we try to cultivate, then these clinging on to the five senses with the five aggregates and thinking of the five gradually go, and coupled with bhavana, which is vipassana bhavana, because it's only when you actually see it, by Vitakka, and you see the Upadati Banga, and when you actually see it fading away, and then you realize the impermanence, and then of course, then comes understanding, because things are changing, therefore it's unsatisfactory. So when these elements come together in your practice, and you just take it like that without worrying about where you are or what you are, I must get it and something, then you're allowing and accepting and being in the moment, Bhante. So it becomes all much more easier to progress than when we think, right, now we are old, we have probably got 2 or 3 years more old, and we have all this Dhamma about, and because immediately we are clinging, we want to get into new. So it becomes a lot of anxiety and stress. So this sutta is very good in putting into perspective of the selflessness and about the nekkhamma and about the giving and bringing those divine qualities of mudita and karuna and things, as opposed to the five aggregates clinging on to the five senses and building up the sense of an ego mantra. So thank you very much for it, because you brought all those and tied up together like that. Otherwise, we do classes, then we try to learn all the sutras, then we try to do all these things and practice every day. But that's not really it, but it's about seeing in a much broader, for me anyway, much broader way, how these things come and being in the moment and seeing them being and not doing that, and these important things that you put together, that gradually that sense of ego gets little by little gets dissolved, and you get closer to where you want to be, to these states of mind. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, dear.
Bhante,
Yes,
Bhante, I just want to know the actual name of the sutra. I couldn't get it properly.
Nadi Sutra,
Nadi Sutra. And the translation by whom was it, Bhante?
Piatan.
Bhante,
Thank you, Bhante.
Yes, hold on, Shriyani. Samantha, yes?
Thank you, Bhante. I was also just thinking now, if we try to if you were to understand this concept of non-self, understand the cause and effect in life, like the process of dependent arising, origination, dependent origination. Everything is due to causes, and as a result of this, and we have no control of anything. It's obviously, I mean, in the past, it's our karma as well, the vipaka that's coming into effect as well. And then the sati in the moment of awareness, we can have that little bit of control and wisdom to change the course of our next action into a wholesome action. Would that also help if we were to think of the life is in a process of that cause and effect pattern?
Yes, of course. I think cause and effect allows us to sort of allows us to sort of grapple onto all these things that arise and pass away in life. However, however, when it comes to cause and effect, right? Cause and effect is very mental, meaning we work with or sort of realize cause and effect through mental means. It's not physical, no. You can't touch the cause and effect.
Yeah.
We when it comes to selfless living, selfless living, the scope of selfless living is different to cause and effect consideration, right? Which is selfless living falls into all our sort of our life as a whole, right? Like for Samantha, the struggles, that you've been experiencing with taking care of your parents, right? And challenges, the emotional challenges as well. And I think
Yeah.
most of us, in the same manner, go through those same strifes of life, right? But then when we realize the graceful ability of you know the grace to become graceful in this experience, right? In this experience, not to be thinking the cause and effect helps, I think further helps that same thing that we are trying to do. You know what I mean? The cause and effect further helps us to become stronger in being or having a life fueled by selflessness.
And being humble.
Humble to this moment. I feel like other forms of being humble in other forms can be very, it can very easily and most often does turn into Vanchagadhamma, right? Very easily, because if we don't understand something, if we truly do not have a realization that there is no self in this, how do we become humble? you know uh, Now, when we are younger, when we are young, even now, sometimes we have to worship people. Being Sri Lankans, we have to worship people. Being a monk, we have to worship people. You guys also have to worship people if it is like a older person. And some of these older people, that these people are absolutely not worthy of respect, right? Because we cling on to some aspect of their being which is against your values or morals or Buddhism or whatnot, right? But then sort of we humble ourselves and to sort of, most often we push ourselves just to keeping up with the Joneses kind of situation, just to not create a scene, isn't it? Right? And that often happens. Now, see, that is not about being selfless. That is just doing it so to avoid difficulty and challenge an uncomfortable situation. Selflessness reaps from understanding, and that understanding, if it's difficult, to have that sense of understanding in everything, it's a bit, I feel like it's a bit challenging sometimes. But if our call in life in the first place, our call in life, we come into this sort of realization that, look, I don't need to get something back for me to do something. I mean, this is a concept that many people in the West cannot understand, right? Cannot understand. We have a closer relation to this because we have been ingrained in giving dana, taking care of people. I mean, isn't it? Our cultures are so inclined in dana. Sometimes, the fact of giving something free, a meal even free, to a person, sometimes these people cannot understand. Why are you doing this? What do you want? Right? We don't want anything, just enjoy your meal, right? That is a concept that sometimes people don't understand. Why? Because their minds don't work in that manner. They've not been trained in that manner. We have, right? Of course, we have a lot more, not to say that we are in any way above or superior, but I believe the cause and effect further enriches the ability to develop, to live, to mold a life of selflessness.
Yeah.
A life of selflessness. right?
Mm.
And I think even as a monk, sometimes, when, sometimes people knowingly or unknowingly can be very rude. Even monks can be very, I mean, sometimes I'm rude to you guys also sometimes, but regardless, that is not with, bad chetana, but still, like, uh, still, like, it happens, right? But the thing is, we have to sometimes put up with it, right? We had to sometimes put up with it. And of course, being in a position of a monk or in a position of a devotee, you can't really show your sort of, that you're upset with it or somewhat. And that itself, sometimes in these positions, we push ourselves to then sort of think out of the box without that sense of self. But what if we can sort of, train ourselves to then come into positions where we do not live in the illusion that it has to be nice, that it has to be pleasurable. Know what I mean?
Mm.
That it has to, that is an illusion that is ingrained, that it has to be pleasurable,
Mm.
that it has to be nice. That comes from that self part, where the self has to be comfortable, self has to be good, right? But if our lives are of service, then that shift makes life far more different.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
You know what I
That
mean?
makes, yeah. Art of giving. Mm.
The art of giving, and giving in every possible, a vachane parasamapatti arthenma dima, giving in every sense of the word, because
Mm.
that is exactly what we do, Samantha.
Mm.
That is our lives from day one to, from the time that we have proper awareness, ability to think. That is all what we've been doing, giving. Think about it. Even now, we are still giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. Yes, we've got some stuff, we've got some stuff around us as well. We've built a life. We've built that life all through giving and giving and giving and giving and giving, but giving in a self kind of way.
I thought I've been taking all the time. Sorry, since I was born,
Well,
for my
well,
own self.
yes, Samantha. Giving from self is taking. So every time, if you're giving danayak hari denawa nang, to get merits, to get blessings for your life to become better, that's not giving, that's an exchange,
No.
that's taking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yes, we've been taking, we've been fulfilling this self. But the thing is, we've been doing everything for others, to keep others in our life, to build a life, all of these things. You're nice to people, to build friendships and relationships and all of these things. What if that paradigm shifts? When we are able to, right, when we have proper awareness over it, shift it to a selfless regard.
Yeah.
Now, in that selfless regard, you don't have to get anything back. You are still happy.
Yes.
And your
Yeah.
spiritual power is far more powerful, because you're not hurt again and again, disappointed by the fact of people, not giving you what you wanted. How many times in life, even with the fact of our parents, constantly getting sick or whatnot, you think, my gosh, we took every procedure possible, we did everything, we, took care of them so well, but the situation kept on. You're disappointed in life. Why does it have to be like this? And then you think, okay, karma, you bring in karma to sort of, dissipate that disappointment. But at the end of the day, that is what life is.
Mm.
You don't need karma to make you realize that that is what actually life is.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Gracefully being able to bow out, or gracefully being able to accept that which is happening.
Wonderful. Yeah. That was very helpful. Yeah. Thank you, Bhante. Yeah.
Yeah. Shriyani, yes?
Bhante, this one, when you say the non-self, that you use the Paticca Samuppada, the Arupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara there. So that means, so it's like mind is every Chetana is impermanent. Rupa is impermanent, and phenomena also impermanent. That's what it meant, isn't it?
Yes, all phenomena.
All
It can
phenomena, yeah.
be Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana, mind and
Yeah.
body, right?
Yeah.
So mind is from Rupa,
Yeah.
sorry, body is from Rupa, mind is the other complex. All
Yeah.
of it is impermanent, suffering, and non-self.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Sivul Sankhara,
Siva Sankara. Okay.
right?
Dhammata, with Dhammata. Sankara, එන්නේ ධම්මතාව නිසානේ, ධර්මතාවයක් නිසානේ.
Dharmatavya, so you're talking, okay, in English, so you're talking about phenomena. Phenomena is a sankhara. Sankhara is phenomena.
Yes. Yeah.
So sankhara, if any phenomena arises, it must pass away. Anything that arises that must pass away is a sankhara. Yeah. In the five aggregates of clinging, that sankhara is consciousness, or rather mental formations, right? That is mental formations, chetasika dharma. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Chetasika dharma. Chetasika dharma. Yeah. So formations. Sorry. Formations. There was his other chart. Here. Formations is of three types. Avijja, Pachya, Sankhara. Right? So Avijja, Pachya, Sankhara is of can be sort of divisible into sort of the fabrications that we do, right? Formations have here been sort of devised by fabrications. The fabrications that we do are of three types: bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. Right? මේ තුනම සංස්කාරය ඇති කරනවා. Right? මේ තුනම සංස්කාරය ඇති කරනවා. දැන් මෙතන you see, can you see the small lines here, everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you see, avijja is ignorance. Avijja pachya sankhara. Avidyava hinda sankhara hataganama. Right? Because of, I'm sorry, I'm shifting to single all the time. I'm sorry. Because of avijja, sankhara arises. Right? Sankhara is all three of this. Now, in sankhara, the bodily sankharas, right? The bodily sankharas leads to the mental, and the mental sankharas lead to the bodily. Right? Do you understand? ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් කීමු යම් අවස්ථාවක මොකක් හරි
අන්ති ටිකක් වැඩි කරන්න, make it increase a little bit the size of it.
මේ size එකද?
Yes, please.
Let me see. Zoom. Oh. Here.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here, because of the sankhara, the bodily sankharas create the mental sankharas. That is, if something hits the body, right? If something hits the body, that creates the mental creates the body as well. If you're feeling uncomfortable, let's say our bowel movements are affected, for example, right? If you're feeling sort of for a long period of time, bodily. And then the verbal, if we hear something or whatnot, if we are seeing something, that affects the mental, right? Now, these sankharas, the way the sankharas are created here, right? The way the sankharas are created. Now, because of aging and death, there's a 12th one right at the bottom here. Me jara vyadi marnadi dukkhe hinda, right? Again, we create sankharas. right? Then may even our meditation, we get very anxious. Why am I not developing? Why am I not developing? Right? Now what? Aging, death, jara, vyadi, marnadi, dukkaya, right? අපේ හිතට ආවර්ජනා වෙනකොට මේ දුක්ඛය හේතුවෙන් දැන් අපි ආපෝ සංඛාර හදනවා. ඒ සංඛාර පදනමෙන්, because of that foundation of sankhara, what happens is we start developing the same consciousness and all of that. Right? So now just imagine this cycle of how we cling is quite intricate, and it's so sort of complex in the way that it happens, because it's just not simply like overlapping again and again and again, or just on one cycle. We find reasons and objects from different places to enwrap the experience even more, right? To enwrap that experience even more, right? That chart is found in Achan Thanisaro's book with regard, what is his book's name? Achan Thanisaro. That book's name is, I think, hold on. The Shape of Suffering. The Shape of Suffering, that is a digital sort of version of The Shape of Suffering. The Shape of Suffering PDF. This is the PDF if you want it, right? The Shape of Suffering. So yeah. So everyone, is that all the questions that we have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante.
All right. So have a lovely rest of the evening, everyone. I will see you all tomorrow morning for meditation. Teruan Sannai. And thank you for joining us.
Bhante.
There was
It was
some-
a-
Thank you, Bhante.